Thanks to our friends at The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Rive to receive the top 10 stocks to buy right now. Artificial intelligence has got the attention of the market and people who are following the tech industry with products like ChatGPT and Midjourney. Is this going to be the most disruptive piece of technology in the next decade? I think the answer might be yes and no. So to talk about this, I want to talk with Jon Quast, the creator of Working Capital JQ here on YouTube. Jon, how are you doing today?
Doing very well, Travis, and excited to talk about this.
Yeah, and we're going to have a broad conversation here and try to put people in the right mindset when thinking about artificial intelligence and how it is going to be disruptive, maybe to existing companies, maybe for new companies. But Jon, how do you want to frame this? Because I think a lot of people have a lot of similar questions. I've been diving into this for quite a while now, and it seems like once you get into things like ChatGPT, Midjourney, it can be easy to think that that's what everybody's doing, but that's probably not the case. So what questions do you have about AI right now?
Travis, it's really interesting. I feel like I've been hearing about artificial intelligence now going back maybe a decade. And then all of a sudden here, is it just in the last month that artificial intelligence has become the buzzword among the investing community and beyond the investing community? You're seeing this in just Fox News and CNN headlines as well, talking about all of a sudden the rise of artificial intelligence. You mentioned two things right here that are very much in the public awareness, ChatGPT and Midjourney. And I guess my question for you, we've been hearing about artificial intelligence, but do these new products represent some sort of a breakthrough?
I think the answer is yes, but where we go from here is maybe a little bit unknown. And let me give a little bit of context on how artificial intelligence, how these models that have come out work. And then we can maybe talk about what's going to be built on top of them. Because right now, the latest news this week was that Microsoft was going to invest an additional $10 billion is the rumored number into OpenAI, the company that developed ChatGPT. They have GPT models. So they have GPT-3 out right now. Supposedly GPT-4 is going to be about 1,000 times better than the current model. So this may get even crazier by summer 2023. There are companies that are putting a lot of money into this. Even companies like NVIDIA have a big tailwind because they're providing the chips that are in some of the core technology for building these models. But there is an artificial intelligence model that is built, and it depends on what kind of model you're building. Let's take the Midjourney model. The artificial intelligence system will create two images, and someone will have to say, let's say you're looking to make a duck, which one looks more like a duck? And then somebody is going to actually go in and say, the left image looks more like a duck. And then they'll do it again. Now the right image does. Now, and so it's that kind of, this called training. This happens over and over and over again. That eventually leads to a model like you have with Midjourney, where you can type in any sort of prompt that you want. I want to have Superman flying over a donut while riding a horse or something like that. And it will literally draw exactly that. Because it has all these, billions of inputs, and you're saying, I want Superman. That's this handful of inputs. So now it knows how to draw Superman. And then you can build on top of that. So an app like Lensa was really popular in December, was one of the top apps in the App Store. They didn't build their own model. They just said Stable Diffusion is the model that they use. They said, well, we're going to create an app that somebody like you or I can go in, take 10 to 20 pictures of yourself. That's what you did, is you uploaded pictures of yourself. And then we're going to use those as inputs to the model to then create an avatar output that I think was 25 images. And so that's like the base layer. The model itself is like the foundation. And then apps are going to end up being built on top of that. So OpenAI was originally started as a nonprofit to provide this as open source software that has changed over time. But Stable Diffusion is open source. I think there's going to be more and more of these models that people who are building innovative things can build on top of, and then we can build it into, Microsoft is going to build it into Bing. I think it's already powering Bing Images, some of their image services there. They're going to build it into their Office products. There's all kinds of applications where AI can be useful if it can actually take an input that's like a question that you have and give you a reasonable output. Now, what those inputs are and what those outputs are is maybe not exactly what people think. It's a little bit like remember when Google became popular in the early 2000s? Then you had to learn how to Google, because you didn't just type, what is the circumference of the sun? You had to go sun circumference. And then if you wanted it to direct you in a certain direction, you had to add other specific keywords. That's kind of changed over time. But it was like you had to learn this whole new language. And I think we're kind of at that point right now where AI is really useful and really cool. It's a cool toy, but it's not yet at the point where it's going to disrupt anything, because we're not using it in the right niches and use cases quite yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you think about artificial intelligence, it seems like one area that I'm skeptical on, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. There are a lot of applications that are trying to predict human behavior, and so building models around that. And I'm actually kind of a hypocrite here because I'm invested in some companies that are very much using AI to a degree in their software. So companies like Upstart, for example, trying to build a better AI model to predict whether or not you're going to be credit worthy based on a lot of factors, not just your credit score. You also have companies like Stitch Fix that say, okay, based on your age and where you live and all these other things and what you've told us about yourself, you're going to like to wear this. And I'm very skeptical on artificial intelligence being able to predict human behavior and being able to, I'm actually pretty skeptical about it being able to emulate human behavior to a passable level. But I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that facet of AI.
One of the things that I've realized over time is understanding at least a little bit about how the models are built and how the inputs and outputs are related, is that AI is actually pretty dumb. It is not, you cannot go into ChatGPT and say, what was the score of the basketball game last night? Because that data is not in the system. You can give it inputs and you can say, I can say, write an email to John with these 6 bullet points, use a friendly tone, and, like end it with a funny joke. Like, you can put that kind of an input in, and then ChatGPT will know how to decipher all that information. And then what it's good at is it's a large language model. So it's good at the language part. Now I could see that easily being transferable to, here's my inputs. Now I'm sending this email to 6 different countries and people who are speaking 6 different languages. Now, goodness, how isn't that awesome that I could potentially communicate in that way? But it's not smart. It's running based on your inputs. And this is what I think is interesting, especially in something like Midjourney. The skill in Midjourney is not Midjourney creating an image. It's how do I take the words of my input to make the system make what I want? You're just steering the AI is the way that I think about it. Skill now is going to go from creating, like painting, creating an image, to editing the image. And I think that's what a lot of people who have been following this for a long time talk about, is now we become editors. So the words example that I had before, now maybe it spits out an email, but maybe one of the sentences doesn't quite make sense, or there's a little bit of information that it didn't interpret correctly. Now I have to edit the email, but instead of writing the entire email, now I'm just editing a piece of it. And depending on the information that you're trying to communicate, maybe the accuracy of the text itself is not the highest priority. You're not trying to write a New York Times edited article. You're just trying to communicate a little bit of information via email or via text message or something like that. That's where it could be, I think, really valuable for now. Now it will get better and better over time and become more precise and professional sounding, or images will get better. But I think right now, I think the important thing to understand for a lot of people who are worried about it, who think it's not going to be anything, wherever you fall, AI is really pretty dumb. And the skill is in being the editor and knowing how to use it to your advantage. And that's something that's going to be the case for a while. That'll probably improve. And that's why I think the real innovations are going to be these niches that find ways to go, okay, AI is really good at this little thing. I'm going to build an app or a website that does that extremely well. And then that becomes disruptive. Maybe it's not Upstart, but maybe it's a patent attorney searching for law documents. Now, what if I can just put a prompt in And instead of it being more like a Google search, now my output is text. Maybe it writes the first 800 words of my patent for me. Those are the kind of things that I think are going to be interesting, but it's going to be more niche use cases than general autonomy, which is something that a lot of people have talked about.
I think another thing to go along with what you're saying, when you look at ChatGPT, for example, how was it able to develop a point where it does actually spit out very intelligible things written very well most of the time? How did it do that? It ingested gobs of data and looked for patterns of communication and was able to interpret those patterns. And if we zoom out on that principle, ingesting gobs of data and looking for the patterns, AI, I believe, is going to be revolutionary and will change so many things when it comes to that. And just as one example, I just saw that in 2022, they finished sequencing the human genome. And actually, up to this point, we hadn't done that. We had come very close. We had done a lot of it, but we actually finished sequencing the entire genome. I don't know if you've ever seen the amount of data that is in the human genome. It's astronomically large. Expecting a human to find a pattern in that from comparing one human to another human, good luck doing that. I think that AI can do something like that. And to stay in the medical field, think about x-rays. Doctors are trained to look at x-rays, but what about the unusual cases? What about the things that some doctors would actually overlook because they're not trained to look for that? How do you train a doctor to look for the unusual things? Well, it comes with experience, right? If you've looked at enough x-rays over and over and over again, you might notice something that a newer doctor might miss. Well, that's kind of a problem if you're a patient of the new doctor, right? And you have one of the unusual things. It's not a fault of the new doctor. This is unusual. This is something that doesn't normally show up. But this does actually happen. This is actually a case study that I read in a book, but how AI will revolutionize that when you think about it, because if every single x-ray could become a data point and AI could then ingest all of that together and then be able to pick out the patterns and say, well, there was somebody in Minneapolis who had this exact same thing as somebody in Tampa, and those two doctors don't talk to each other, so they didn't notice this pattern, but the AI did. How life-changing is that in the world when you have that happening?
And this is where I think you brought up some good examples of we're going to need to look for disruption in artificial intelligence in areas where the capability of AI matches the need. Our AI is terrible at math. This sounds really silly, but you could put a very simple math problem into ChatGPT and it will get it wrong because AI is probabilistic. It wants to probably get the answer right. So based on that gobs and gobs of data that you were talking about, this is what I, as an AI, think is probably the right answer based on the 1,000 or 10,000 options that I had. But it will not definitely get the right answer. So we do not want AI designing bridges or rockets. But so think about what sort of fields are going to be disrupted by things like AI. Medicine. Is your doctor always right? No, your doctor takes in as much information as they can and they give you probably the right answer. Could AI be better at that? Maybe not today, but maybe in the future. Maybe it would be you talked about a high-end use case for AI. What about a low-end use case for AI? We both have kids. Your kids never get sick at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday when the doctor's office is open. It's always Friday night at 9:30 that somebody comes down with something. Here's what they have. Here's what's going on. Here's all the information. Now AI, tell me what I need to know. What remedy can I do at home? There's just so many interesting use cases that maybe a doctor is where you would go for that today, but maybe the doctor's office isn't open. Maybe spending $150 or whatever it is to go into the doctor is either not feasible, not possible, obnoxious. There are, I think, really interesting use cases that we're not thinking about. And this is why I tweeted this week, but the disruption from AI, I think, is going to be a lot less over the next 12 months than a lot of people think. Great, we can create images. How is that going to add value to the world? I don't know over the next 12 months. You can sell avatars of your and that I'm using one right now on Twitter. I think that's cool. That's worth a few dollars, but it's not game changing. I'm not changing the way that I live. Same thing with ChatGPT. How is that going to actually change the way that I live or work? I don't know that it will today. we've talked about a couple of the use cases that maybe over the next 10 years, this does become really transformative because it enables people to do things that we're paying somebody else right now to do. The doctor is a good example. Maybe I don't go to the doctor, but if I had the option to spend $1 or $5 to get an answer from a AI powered app, maybe I would do that, and maybe I would be better off, or my kids would be healthier as a result. Those are really interesting. That's how disruption works, is it typically either comes at the high end or the low end. And then if it comes in at the low end and it gets better and better over time, then that's how 10 years from now, things look completely different. I also think a lot of us who are in a lot of the fields where we're thinking about this is, go back to the editor example. A lot of us are going to become editors and not necessarily do the same things that we were doing before, for better or worse, right? Like the world changed when the computer came around. The world changed when the internet came around. The world is going to change because of artificial intelligence. I don't know exactly how, but it's not going to be people who are installing plumbing who are going to be impacted. It's going to be workers who have benefited from things like computers and the internet. We're just going to have to figure out how to now be a better editor than we were before. And so I think that's the interesting mind shift change that's going to happen. We're starting to see how companies are positioning themselves for this. Microsoft is a good example, but yeah, it'll be a fascinating decade for sure.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, I think that some of the best AI will augment what humans are really good at, and humans will be able to do it even better.
Yeah, and let's talk about a couple of companies. And we talk about investing. So I think we've given a good background on what AI is all about, but I do want to talk about a couple of companies that I think are natural winners. We talked about Microsoft. Apple already starting to include Stable Diffusion, which is an open source piece of software, into its operating system and chips. They have the ability to basically build this AI into your hardware. So now you ask Siri a question, it can maybe give you an answer on device, not even going out to figure out what the score of the game was. Or that's maybe a bad example, but I think that's potentially really interesting, is the companies that can integrate software and hardware. NVIDIA is naturally a company that a lot of people think about. I think that's going to be a tailwind for them. I think a lot more companies are going to be making custom chips to build a lot of these AI models or do things on device. So then you get to a company like TSMC, ticker TSM. Taiwan Semiconductor does most of the high-end chips made in the world today, including Apple's devices. I think that's a company that's going to continue to have a ton of demand as you find more use cases for artificial intelligence, because there will be custom needs for those chips to utilize the models that are available. So those are big companies, but I think they all have significant tailwinds in the artificial intelligence space. And I think for now anyways, based on what we can see, it's going to be very barbell in the way that returns are distributed. It's either going to be the big companies leveraging their cloud infrastructure and their customer base and their technology and all that stuff. And then it's going to be really small companies like, I have an idea, I'm going to make an app with the Stable Diffusion model, let's say, and I'm going to release it and it goes viral. Lenza was a perfect example of that in late 2022. They went from basically zero to almost $3 million in revenue per day in a matter of 2 weeks. So that's going to be, I think, this barbell, at least for the foreseeable future. But there's a lot of disruption coming. I think investors, when people, whether you're working or what your position is in the space, keep an eye on the developments that are going on. You don't need to understand everything about ChatGPT or Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, but understand that this stuff is coming and we're all going to have to adapt to it in some way and figure out how we can help it augment. I think it's going to be incredibly powerful, just like Google was incredibly powerful and useful and helpful. It doesn't mean it didn't change things. I think that's the right framing for the next 10 years, but less disruption than people anticipate over the next 12 months, I think is going to be the theme for 2023, but building a foundation for a really disruptive decade.
And that's really good for investors because that sets up a potential for disillusionment because they get overhyped in the short term and then they throw it out in the medium term. And that's when you can pick it up for the long term.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully this was helpful. AI is something I'm going to be covering a lot here on Rive Investing. So please subscribe to this channel for more information on that and an investor angle, at least. And follow Jon's channel, Working Capital JQ. He's got a lot of great information and insights for investors there. Thanks you for watching. Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Give this video a like, and we'll see you here next time.